All right, we are live,
Oh my
and I
gosh.
usually give it a few minutes to have people join, and then we'll see. It always it's a little shaky in the beginning, and then people start rolling in. So if they take too long, we'll go ahead and get started with our conversation and allow
All
them
right.
time to get caught up in the later on. And
You should
that
tell people about your new necklace in the meantime. That is beautiful.
oh, thank you. Because I lost my favorite sun charm, this is going to be the replacement. And I purchased this at the Juneteenth festival in Annapolis, Maryland. And I'm gonna have to see if I can remember or find the vendor's name because she had some beautiful pieces.
She
And
didn't
so,
happen to make the ring as well, did she?
yes, I got the ring
Yes,
from
very
there too.
stylized.
Oh,
Like,
thank
got
you.
good style to it.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, this will, in sadness, I lost my sun charm that I've had 25, 30 or so years. So
It's
at
gonna
least
turn up.
25. So this is new journeys, new journeys. Hmm.
I like it.
Yeah,
You said it was an amethyst.
I believe
Um,
that's right. Yeah, don't quote me on it, but I think that's what
it
this
looks like
is.
it. There's an amethyst quarry here. It's not a national park. I think it's a state park in Idaho. Um, and we're gonna go to it in about a month. We're gonna go
Oh,
dig
that's
for our own
nice.
amethyst. Yeah, it's
Oh,
kind of cool.
you'll have to keep me posted on what you find.
Yeah,
I would love
Idaho's
to.
the gem state, so they're
I
just
didn't
laying
realize
around
that.
everywhere.
How cool is that?
I don't
How
think I've
cool
seen
is
one
that?
that big come out of there though.
And I was
It's
just
pretty
going to say, if you
mountainy
find a
so
big one, I might buy it.
far. Yeah,
Good
these are
morning.
like little guys.
Good morning. Yeah, if you find a big one, Macy, let's revisit this conversation. Good good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good afternoon. Hello. Hello. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna do my intro. I always like to wait a little bit just to make sure I've done everything right when I hit the live button. So seeing folks in the chat lets me know I did something right. And so I'll start off good morning or good afternoon, just depending on your location. My name is Jewel Pearson. Let me change my slide. I practiced this and still messed it up. My name is Jewel Pearson, and this is Miss Bohemian Soul TV. This is Creating Home, a tiny house series, and this segment that we are about to embark on is the Conversations on Intimate Spaces series. Every Sunday, I offer live content and I'll alternate between these conversations with guests and the What's Your Question, where I answer frequently asked tiny house questions. And to introduce myself, I like to say that I built a kind of fancy tiny house in 2015. And since that time, I have shared my journey to hopefully inspire others who are interested in the movement and to also share just my journey to make it real for people. I do offer coaching and consultations and workshops to help others who are interested in tiny houses and the journey. And I always say I serve up a lot of representation along the way. It's my intent to build figurative and literal community that is inclusive and accessible. And I hope that if you find this information, our conversation, the videos helpful, to if you'll please like it, share it, and then subscribe to the channel so that you can be aware. Turn on your notifications too, so that you can be aware when new content is available. So that is my intro. Thank you so much. So I am, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much. To kick this off, I always say that I believe our houses and our tiny houses, well, houses, period, tell a story about us, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And I tend to think for people who live in tiny houses, there is intent in their decisions to get there and in, within the design, within the journey. And that's what I always hope to explore in these conversations because I believe it is so much bigger than just the tiny house. And so today we might venture off into several conversations. So you all just roll with us and participate like you always do. But before I even ask you to introduce yourself, Macy, I have to. I always talk as people are asking me about how I got into the movement and all of those things. I always share that I stumbled on the story of a woman building her tiny house. And I stumbled on the story around 2012 or so, and the story just resonated with me. And up to that point, I had known I wanted to live a lighter, smaller lifestyle once my daughter was grown. But up to around that time, I had envisioned it as living in an RV and traveling in an RV. And then I saw this story about this woman, and that is when I decided I was building a tiny house. And you are that woman, and it was your story that I saw. And I even reached out and sent an email after reading that story, and you so graciously responded, which
Oh, good.
which which now I know, because of the volume of emails that you can get, in your inbox, in
It's
on
impossible to get them
Instagram.
all, but
Oh
we
my
try.
God, it's there everywhere. And so that later on, as my house became popular and I would get emails, it always stuck with me that because I could only imagine that you got so much response to that story, and and you responded to me. So all of that has stuck with me. So I have to start off and say thank you, because it was your story that had prompted my journey. And so now, 7 or so years later from me, here we are. And fortunately, you and I have made connections many years ago, and I consider you friend. But to kind of get me here, I would have to say thank you, because it
That's
was
really
you.
funny. I had no idea that was like, I'm sorry, you're right. I did get a lot of emails and I tried to reply, but I always think of you as this person who built around the same time I did, that like you just
Nope, I didn't
you're just
build.
always right here.
Yeah, I started researching after I saw your house, but you were the
That's so
impetus
cool.
and the
I
and the
didn't know that.
decision. It was, well, I thought I had shared that with you years ago, so I apologize. So Macy has Macy has a
Sorry,
kitten
he's good.
that is a second guest in this show, so she's got to keep an
Oh,
eye on him.
bless
He's new to the space, so he's exploring. So he should entertain us during this
you.
time. So Macy, please introduce yourself. I wanted to give you your flowers, as they say, but please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you about all of the things. Um, I'm just the person who built a tiny house in 2011, and I swear it's famous because I did it earlier than other people. Like, and that's it.
I don't.
um,
I think you are not giving yourself enough credit, but I understand how we do that.
you
So
know, yeah. So we happen to still live in our tiny house. We are well, June passed, so we're gosh, I started building in 2011. We either just passed year 9 or year 10. I don't know. Um, Move-in date, I think this is 9 years living in this tiny house. Um, and we love it. I have a degree in architecture, but with that degree came very little actual knowledge. And so the tiny house for me was an effort to try to understand systems and how they actually go together, because architecture school is a lot of theory and a lot of pretty and a lot of design. And I needed something hands on to put together to do the thing, so that I could learn the things. Um, I happened to be going through divorce. And like, I think I got laid off in the middle of my tiny house build, which was like, atrocity. But then I was later hired back in the recession. Um, it was a lot of, I don't know, necessary stuff that had to happen, but it was a rough spot in my life that led me to here, which has been a very happy trail for me. And so
yeah,
we just keep doing it.
yeah, yeah. So if is there one thing like your why when you were building your tiny house the initially, is there one thing that you can point to as your why, or is it just multiple things that
It was multiple things, but the biggest why was education, for sure. I'm a female in a male-driven field, and it's hard to go into a meeting with the authority you have to have without feeling that authority that you do know, you know?
mhm
Um, and so when I'm talking to mechanical engineers and electrical engineers and I'm trying to get everybody to collaborate, I needed to understand it thoroughly in order to go in there with the, I don't know, oomph that I
mhm
needed to be
mhm
able to lead the meeting because I mean, it doesn't even matter. The nicest guy in the field kind of shrugs off a female telling them what to do, you
right,
know?
absolutely.
The only thing that saves you is a title sometimes. But I needed to feel that in myself too, and so it was a largely the only reason I justified the cost for not being able to know that I had a place to call home was for education. I thought of it like another semester of school. So
Yeah, I think it's funny, and we talk about that all the time. How as women in, like, even building, like I didn't physically build my house, but dealing with, and it still happens, dealing with construction work, people in men in construction or electricians and all of those things, how they discount everything that because it is a male dominant field. And what's interesting to me is the fact that you felt, you had the credentials, but you had to have the hands on to feel confident to be at the table. But and this is a different show altogether. But men will have zero experience and
I
sit at the
know.
table
And they're
and
just
punt.
assumed to know what they're talking about
E-
better than me. Like,
exactly.
yeah, and not all of them. I've had,
They
I mean, there's
agree.
a lot of really good guys, but who, it's not the norm.
Yeah, yeah, and they don't care if they don't have any experience, and the woman can be sitting there with 25 years of experience, and they still will often mansplain. And so that's
Yeah.
interesting, but a whole
You
different.
know what I find interesting about that is the AIA, the organization that handles architects, they track female statistics that remain in the field, like females who graduate, get licensed, and then bail on the field because there's an epidemic of
Mm-hmm.
females bailing on the field, and they're trying to understand why. And every female is like, I can tell you, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's hard to like get all of the credentials and hold zero respect. Every project, ground zero, start up again. And by the end of it, you've kind of proven yourself enough that, you know, you're a competent person to talk to. But then the next project kicks
You got
off
to
and it's
start.
down here again.
Like,
There's only so
yeah,
much of that people are willing to take before they're like, you know, I'll be appreciated somewhere else. And so they
absolutely,
jump. And
absolutely.
AIA says it's because they become mothers, which is not
Oh
the truth.
wow. Oh
But
wow.
it's just like it's a thing. Like
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
That's a
yeah. So
that's
I
a
kind of left architecture, uh, but yeah, I still
yeah.
use it. I still build things. I just do it for myself.
Absolutely, absolutely. You do. So thinking back on, so you started building 2011, and as I was researching, and I always talk about how and you had the Facebook groups, and it was always the comments like the whole point of the tiny house movement is, and people would line
Mhm.
up what they felt like the tiny house movement was about, and at that time the main focus was minimalism, and there were unspoken rules of you didn't build your house bigger than this, you didn't spend more money than this, like all of those
Yeah.
things. um and so now 2022, and we look at the movement and we see how much the movement it has changed. How, so this is a two-parter, so I'm gonna tell you both questions and then answer them. I want to know how that makes you feel, like looking at the movement now, the big luxury houses, the kind of the what we know is like the opposite of the spectrum. And then the second part is a question of seeing the designs now would that have impacted your design, and would you have
Oh my
done
gosh.
things differently? And so the first part, like looking at the movement and knowing, because you remember all of those conversations, the whole point of the
Yeah.
movement is, then somebody would say, well,
Oh yeah.
that's your point, that's not what everybody else has to do, and it would
Yes.
spiral into an argument. What do you think now, looking at the movement?
All very heated. I was like, come on, man, is it working
Absolutely.
for you? Like,
Absolutely.
um, I, it's interesting to watch the movement change, and I will say that I've checked out of it a little bit. Really, right before we went on our trip, I made a conscious decision to kind of remove myself from it a bit. It was getting big, it was getting mean, it was changing, and it was not affecting me
Mhm.
well up here. You know,
Mhm.
I felt so invested in this thing that was allowed to change. But it's hard to watch the change, and I don't love how it's gone. I've always I understand how it's gone. It's more industry now than it was. Like, I really feel like the heart of the tiny house movement is in the DIY, not in building yourself, but investing yourself in the
Got it.
process.
Mhm.
Designing it, having intent, and not just ordering a box online, you know.
Mhm.
I just don't understand, and I could be wrong, um and say I'll fit my life into that.
Uh-oh.
Somebody who designs a box to enable a lifestyle, and it life into a situation. Um, and I think in
I think we might be having some connection issues, Macy. Can you still hear me? I don't know if it's me.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
You look good. You sound good. I hear it looks all
Okay.
normal to me.
Okay. Something, it might
Are
have
we
been
good?
me. I've got storm, so it might be me. So I'm sorry. So
We
you
can
were
blame.
saying,
We'll blame it for you.
you were saying,
He wasn't doing me.
so I missed
Um,
part of it, so I don't know, but you were saying about picking a box, the difference in intent and just kind of picking a box online. So
yeah. Well, and it could be useful, you know. It gets back to what's your point, you know.
mhm.
If it is to get you through this hurdle, then picking a box might be the best option. But I think if you're thinking about a longevity and a lifestyle change, the box has to be fit for you. You know,
Mhm.
it's got to enable your lifestyle the way you want, the one you want. Um, because the way I live in the world right now is a whole lot different than the way I lived in the world 15 years ago.
Mhm.
And it was an intentional decision to make a house that enabled that, you know. And part of that for me was minimalism. It's really easy to collect things and stuff, and when you don't have room for things and stuff, you get real intentional about that, and I like that. It's not naturally how I am, but I
Okay.
enjoy that the house enables that with me, and it kind of supports me in my goals when I don't have the fortitude, you know. um but I don't know. I tiny small spaces I don't imagine would be fun if they weren't suited to you.
Right.
Um, and
Absolutely.
so I don't like the shift that's happened where it's gone more to industry. Because what you end up with is some builders telling you how tiny houses are done instead of some really creative, cool minds out there inventing solutions, because that's where the fun is to me.
Mhm.
Um, and you ask, would I do my house different if I saw different examples? Yeah, I would. There's so much cool stuff out there. My house is so vanilla. I didn't even know. Like, the challenge for me was just building a small space that I was happy enough to live in. But like the cool hiding beds and the like, I'm not a super fan of like multifunctional things, but I like hiding things, or like the drop down ceiling beds, you know, like those are cool. I would
Yeah.
have totally done more stuff like that, but at the time there wasn't a lot of options that I could bounce my ideas off of, you know. I do wonder how a second house would look that if I was able to design it, but there's cooler houses out there than that house would look. It would just, there's some fun functional things that I would love to play with or would have incorporated, but my vanilla house has done pretty well.
And I beg to differ that your house is vanilla, and I think that's a great segue. And someone just asked if you will show us your house, and absolutely, I always share pictures. So we are going to do a tour of Macy's
Cool.
house and talk through some of the pictures, and we're gonna kind of go back and forth with talking to pictures because we are kind of going to segment pieces of this conversation. So I know that, and so starting off, and before you give us the tour, I know the add-on space that I think is 10 on the, if I'm looking at on the left hand side, is the add-on. So what I
Yep.
saw in the first time I had seen a tiny house on wheels is the part that was the wood part. And it was just amazing to me, just the concept, because for me, having considered an RV all of this time, the opportunity to have pictures on the wall and like what you were just saying, design it so that it was home and it was intentional. Just it was just like something that my wheels started turning, and that was the thing that was really impressive to me. So
I
Macy,
think that's so cool.
yeah, I am going to ask you to give us the tour and talk about the house.
Okay, I have a quick question for you, real quick, Jewel.
Yes.
Um, you're seeing questions from people. Am I able to see that on my end somewhere that I'm just not flipping it, or
No,
you'll let me know
probably
if there's
yes,
questions?
yes, probably not. So I'll add them to the screen and then address them so that you can see them. I didn't think you could see the questions, but I'll
Okay.
cover them.
So this is my house. This is when it was in Boise, Idaho. I had it right downtown, in everybody's view on a corner lot for 4 years. Um, it is, let's see, the flatbed part is 29 feet long with the addition. The addition is the tin part, as you mentioned. I built that in 2015 when I had my son. We kept that, before was just a kind of covered patio area that I had a chair out
Right,
there I could go read a book.
right, right. I,
Um,
I can
and
relate
then
to
we had my
you.
daughter.
I feel like you do remixes like I do remixes. So I forgot that used to be the patio, and then you enclosed it. Absolutely.
Do you know how jealous I am of your remix? I've
No,
been itching to build a patio on our place, and lumber skyrocketed, and I'm just way too frugal to deal with that. And so I'm just biting my nails, hoping lumber comes down
I'm
a little.
I'm
But
waiting.
I
I know you'll
love your
do it.
patio. You
Oh,
did
thank
such
you.
a good job.
Thank you. I know
Um,
you will do it.
one day, hopefully very soon. And that was my daughter. That's inside. It's just I used I my total budget. I wanted to build the house for less than a year's worth of rent payments because I wasn't sure that I'd be able to live there very long, as the legal gray area dictates. And so my budget was $10,000 to $12,000. I spent $11,400. So a lot of the materials in it are reclaimed. The structure's not. The siding outside is shipping pallets disassembled and planed
Oh
down
wow.
and used. Um, the inside is drywall, which is one of those rules you're not supposed to do, but we've done it for a decade and it's fine. Um, Kitchen, it's pretty basic stuff. The light fixtures I made with my brothers. I wanted to learn how to blow glass. For me, like the whole thing was, it was just an education. I wanted to learn how to blow glass, and so I
Okay.
I paid money, and they were expensive, but I took my brothers out for a little family date and had them make me a sconce for a light in my kitchen,
Oh,
and I love
very
them.
cool.
I love
Very
them.
cool.
They're my whimsy. Everything's pretty. I don't know. I don't know how you can look at this and not say it's vanilla. Everything's in there. It's just as plain as it could be.
I think because this was my first love of a tiny house, And
Yeah.
so it will never be vanilla to me. It was my inspiration. I always thought it was so cool. So no, it's not vanilla to me at all.
I love that. But like literally everything I made to be as easy and cheap as I could make it. I just tried to fit the basic forms together, and I picked, a neutral material scheme. Like my whole thing was I wanted my belongings to speak more than the house did. And so it's pretty white inside. And that way, if I got bored, I could, get some new throw pillows or something. Apparently, I don't do that. But the idea was that the aesthetic could change based on my belongings instead of the structure. It was just this vessel that held my life, so I didn't want it to speak too loud. And here it turns out it's one of the loudest speakers of my life. But
Absolutely, absolutely. You did that. That one didn't happen the way you imagined it.
But yeah, and so in this picture, the bathroom is to the left, um, behind that sliding. I have a little sliding barn door that I made out of the same bamboo hardwood floor that I put in there. I did the countertops out of the same thing, uh, and the shelves and everything. And it still exists just like this. This wasn't how it originally looked. It originally had like a black floor, which was horrible and cold. When I had my kid and she's crawling around on it, it was a black tile floor.
I remember
And
that.
she was just a little ice cube in there. So I ripped it out so it'd be a little warmer for her to crawl on. So when we did the renovation, we just kind of updated that material choice.
You
I also
also
had
had the
radiant heat.
radiant exactly. So, and I think I
Yeah.
remember you saying years ago that that wasn't beneficial at all, other than maybe in the summertime. I think you said something like that.
The
It didn't
summertime,
work.
I kept it nice and cool. So for the radiant floor, you have to, and so this house was a testing facility. I know radiant heat is a really good heat. We recommend it to clients all the time.
Right.
I didn't know how to actually function. So I put radiant heat in, and my downfall was that I did electric radiant heat. And it cost so much money to heat because I had to do it 9 months of the year instead of, in Idaho, typically you're only heating for 3 months a year. But in spring and
Okay.
fall, I had to keep it heated or it was an ice cube in there, which some people like. I don't. My
Yeah,
brother would
me
have
neither.
loved it, but I like warm feet.
Yeah.
And I didn't like my baby being so cold crawling around on the floor like that. So I
Right.
ripped it out and I'm much happier with it. It would have been different if it was hydro radiant heat, I think. I would have liked to
Okay.
try hydro and solar heated some water to send through there, but it was too much for me to make sense on such a whim at the time. That is something I would try again if I was to
Okay.
redo something. But yeah, it's pretty basic. Like I pulled a stove out of a RV that was trashed sitting in the middle of a field. I literally like walked up to the door and I said, "Hey, can I go take parts out of that thing?" And they're like, "Sure." And I've been using the same stove. It's fantastic for 10
Oh
years.
wow.
Like,
How?
I mean, it's
Oh
ugly
wow.
as heck, but I didn't want to spend the money on that stuff. So, all those money saving efforts added up over time to less than $12,000 house that I've lived in for a decade. But it is an ugly stove. One day I'll get a different one, but man, it cooks well.
Yeah. So how long did your build take, Macy?
18 months, and I thought it
Okay.
would take 6. I went a little
Yeah.
over, but
Yeah.
this is the add-on. My kids' bunk beds. Hazel got the bottom, and at that point, I co-slept with Miles, and then eventually Hazel got the top bunk, and Miles got the bottom bunk. But they still look like that. I took the gates off, but that's still there.
I
Yeah,
think the point we in workshops, and I know you talk about it, how like there's a trade-off. If the still the way to save money with a build is doing the work yourself, but
yeah,
then there's also the time
time.
period, and it's going to
Yeah,
take a lot longer than you even anticipate in
yeah.
doing it yourself. And so the trade-off is, if you need it in a hurry,
Time and money.
then yeah, time and money is always you have to pick which one is going to be most
Yep.
important, and go and move accordingly. If you need it in a hurry, you're going to really have to, unless you are the expert, you're going to have to
Yeah.
hire the experts, and then your costs go up. So that's
And it's
a good
really
point.
hard when you're the one doing it and you can watch other people, like, build these cool remix editions. They're like, "I want it so bad." I'm
Yeah,
at least a year out if I started today. Like,
yeah.
it's just one
And
of those
you,
things you balance, though.
that's true. And you even got hurt during your build, didn't you? Didn't you fall
Mm,
and
I did. I broke my back and my foot. The hardest bone in the body to break. I did it, and then my
uh,
spine as well. And that's when I got famous because people were like, write about safety. And I'm like, no, I shouldn't do that. But yeah, it's more expensive to fix a broken back than it is to build a tiny house. So be
okay,
careful.
well,
That's the takeaway.
noted. That was noted. We'll take that away. So two questions, because and thank you for the share of the house. And again, it will never ever be vanilla to me. And this part here was just kind of
I like
watching.
vanilla. I'm just
No,
saying,
yeah,
there's a lot
yeah.
of cooler houses.
Well, so thank you. I think so. It was nice watching your journey as James appeared on the scene, and then Hazel, later Miles. It was neat also watching how your home changed to accommodate um family, and your, again, cool designs, like, looking here, and the gate for the bunk beds and all of those things. I've always enjoyed watching you do the things that you do with your home. And I feel like your
Thank
point
you.
earlier of the intention, um, I, I feel like that is the way that you stay in your house longer. Like, there's a question in the chat where someone asked, had either of us regretted going tiny? And if so, how did we work through that? For me personally, that I've never had any regret, but I also know it was based on the intention. I went into designing my house, designing it specifically for me, and I think that
Yeah.
has made all of the difference. And so, how would you? I saw your zero, but I'm
I've
thinking you're
had
the same.
zero regrets whatsoever. With that, I will also tell you, I will not live tiny forever. And the
Okay.
reason is I have kids. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the tiny for me, was the step. It was only ever a 2-year plan. I was hoping to get 2 years out of it, expecting that I wouldn't, you know? And then it just kept working. And, I wanna build something different, and I have that itch lately that I really James is also an architect, um, and we banter about design, and it's getting too real for me to not be like, "Okay, we gotta do it real quick." But in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be building again, some sort of ground-bound house. The tiny house is what allowed me to save the money that I could
Mm-hmm.
buy 6 acres with cash, move the tiny house to it, live legally, and now I'm saving cash for my next build. A big part of my thing, I've already gone through a foreclosure. I was married. That's kind of part of the crash that led to the tiny house. And I'll never be in debt to a bank again. And so everything is about saving the money and then doing the thing. And that's what we've been doing for the last decade. And eventually we'll build the thing. But
Yeah.
the tiny house will always be a part of our story. Its final resting place is right here where it is now. Except my daughter wants to take it to Hawaii. We'll see how she feels about that in 10 years. But if she wants to, hey, more power to you. I'll give it to her.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. So I've
but
also got
zero regrets.
pictures. Yeah, zero regrets for me either. So I've got pictures of your world tour and also your current property. But before we talk about those pictures, so you shared that your house was kind of, as I understood it, you said you wanted the house to be more vanilla because you wanted the belongings to speak for you.
Yeah.
And even though that really didn't happen, as you were thinking through that,
what was it that you wanted your home to say about you? Like the first thought, as you were thinking, I want my belongings to speak for me. What were you thinking?
This
You
is
wanted
another
your house to say.
non-answer
This is
because
what?
this is another non-answer because the whole point of me picking tiny was my statement to the world that my house
Okay.
doesn't matter. Like,
Okay.
I I'm gonna experience the world. And, before I had a 2,500 square foot house with a giant mortgage, and it was demanding too much of me. And so I wanted a house that enabled a better life. And it didn't matter. I didn't think people would like my tiny house. My tiny house was a statement that this doesn't matter. I don't care what you think about my house. I'm going to live my life. And so I didn't have any expectations of what my house would say to me other than maybe she's, a bold-faced whatever. Like, it was a different path and it just
Interesting.
didn't matter. I didn't identify with my house. And, like, to this day, like, everybody names their tiny house, and I really want a cool name, but, like, almost by design, it doesn't have a name. Like,
My house doesn't have a
it's
name
the
either.
house that I sleep in, and it's just another thing. It's a thing that helps other things happen better, but it's not a part of my identity, I guess. It has become that way, but through no actions of my own.
Got it.
If that
That
makes
wasn't
sense.
your intent. That's very interesting. Especially knowing, 10, 11 years in how that has turned out, but your
Yeah.
intent going into it was very different, and your planned statement was very different. How cool is that? And I guess
It's
that
been a very surprising journey for sure.
And I guess that also points out how, like, no matter how hard we try to dictate our journey and our intent in our journey, that our intent may not ever be someone else's perception. And I think that speaks
Yeah,
so well to that.
yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so then and so I kind of think when you started working on the camper is when you started running into issues with the city. Is that correct?
It was not. It correlated well.
Okay.
No, James was, I think he was getting a little jealous that I had a design project that was cool and he never got to do one. Um,
Okay.
no, when we met, we actually bonded quite a bit. He had always wanted to build a houseboat, and then he heard about me building this tiny house, and we kind of bonded over that. But we wanted to do something cool together. And so at that point, this was about 3 years into the tiny house journey. I became debt free. And eventually, James moved in. He was able to become debt free. And so then he transitioned his job from an office job and he kind of started his own company. And we kind of dared each other, like, do you think we could be location independent? And so we started this idea of, well, let's try. Like, the best way to try if you're location independent is to move around a lot. And so I wanted a little camper, and we did not want to rebuild a camper. I wanted a little vintage camper that I could pull with our little SUV. And it, it turned into a complete overhaul, but it was a project for us to work together. I convinced him to buy this camper for me for Mother's Day, and then the Mother's Day the following year we set off on the road. And so we ended up getting it. We took it all the way down to the trailer. The wheels and the windows are original. Everything else we built and sourced. But we did it together, and it was kind of a camper that maybe built our relationship a little bit better. We had kind of a fast and tumultuous relationship at the beginning years. We didn't mean to have Hazel, but we found ourselves having Hazel, and and we pecked our way through that and found a pecking order. Decided we still liked each other. We're gonna have a second, and then we'll do some cool stuff together. Um, and so this was kind of the project where we kind of bonded better as a couple and in a more free form sort of way. We also happen to have two kids. but we designed it. I designed all the furniture and the working parts that we use, and he did all the systems and stuff. He's far more into electrical and plumbing and stuff like that. Even though he's a really good designer, he lets me have that stuff for the functional things. And so like that's the kitchen. And we designed it to be off-grid compatible because we wanted to do more boondocking, which is staying on like
Mm-hmm.
public lands for free. You guys don't have so much of that on the East Coast public lands, but on the West, there's a lot of public lands where you can just go park and camp for 14 days or whatever. And so we hooked this up to solar. It was our first like trip into off-grid power for us, so that we could boondock for weeks at a time. It's got a little shower, a little potty. That's the benefit of accidentally buying a rotted out trailer to rebuild, is you could, like, they didn't come with bunk beds and a bathroom. This is a 1966 Aloha travel trailer. And so we were able to add bunk beds to fit our kids, and those actually expand out. That little cupboard moves, and they'll pull out and fit an adult in them. But for the purpose of our trip, our kids were short, so we just kept it little, and we could have more space in there. And then we were able to add the toilet and the shower. That excuse me, that table deal is the side of the camper, or side of the counter, so it just folds up and latches there. And then we each
Oh,
got
very
one
cool.
travel suitcase, and so there's 4 suitcases underneath there, and some dog food for the dog. And then we just hit the road, and we were on the road for 13 months. At a
So
point
I'm
we
going, I want to
yeah,
go back, Macy, 1 second. I want to go
okay,
back to the side of the counter to show where that table is,
oh sure,
because I
yeah,
completely
so
missed it. So there it is there.
that table, yeah, you can see a little latch back there,
Yes.
but you could pull that out and set it up and have a little dinner table in the space. So this camper is the footprint of it is 10 foot by 7 foot. And that couch folds out to be the bed for James and I, and or it pulls out, I guess. It doesn't fold out. So it really was just a place for us to sleep and to cook a meal. And then the whole point of the gig for me was to be out and exploring. And so we took it from Idaho over to Niagara Falls and up to Maine, and then down the whole East Coast to the Florida Keys. And then we zigzagged over to Death Valley in California, and then back to Colorado, and then back to California. uh, we just did a zigzag. We went to as many national parks as we could. That's Painted Desert. That's Mount Rainier. And it's so fun
And
because I have a memory attached to each of these images. Like, I know exactly how I felt that day when I took that picture. And it's so cool to go, like, it it was just such a great experience. I wish that everybody could go travel and see the beautiful things in this world, because man, are they just awesome. But
that's
here we are.
Denver. We didn't introduce Denver.
That's, oh yes, that's our dog Denver. Denver the Great Dane. He's a good
And
boy.
it was, so we didn't even talk about, so initially it was you and Denver in the tiny house before
Yeah,
everybody else came along. So
me and
it was
Denver, and then James, then Hazel, then Miles,
then
then
Miles.
Ginger, and now little baby Oreo. They're just building along. That is in
Gorgeous.
Utah. That's the Great Salt Lake. That was a cool place to go to. So yeah, it was a grand experience. We've been to 53 of the 61 national parks so far. We haven't gone to Alaska. That's what we're missing. And a couple islands we couldn't get Denver out to. And he would have been heartbroken to be dog sat. He's just a
Yeah.
little, he's a very emotional guy, and he doesn't like to be separated.
Yeah. And so
But
I'm gonna pause really quickly, because I forgot to mention this. And Sandra, thank you as always. Thank you for the super chat. So I always share that if you feel inclined, please feel free to share some love and appreciation with my guest, via super chats, or if you prefer to avoid YouTube's 30% cut feel free to cash at me. I did just drop that information in the chat window to share love with the guest. I always appreciate that. So thank you very much. So there is a question about the camper as to whether the windows are portholes.
Oh, those are pet peaks. Those are, it's a little plexiglass bubble, and they're designed to go in fences so that dogs could stick their heads through and see out. And we
Oh,
just put them in the bunk beds so that our kids could stick their heads through and see the stars.
how cool is that? That reminds me of the things like at the McDonald's Playland, those little
Yeah,
things where you can peek
yeah,
out. That's
totally.
very
That's what it is.
okay.
They're
Very,
super
very
clear
cool.
though. Those things get scuffed up pretty good. And these actually have held up really well, especially like being on the road. I think they'd get dinged up and scratched, but they still look brand new, which is crazy. But the road trip was kind of a transition. We, like you mentioned, just about when I was done, we were done building the camper, I got a code violation on the tiny house after living in it for a little over 4 years. I came home to a notice on my door that said I had to vacate or bring it up to code. There was no code existing for it.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I had been working with Andrew and Gabriella and a handful of other people who were writing an appendix for the International Residential Code. And so I was able to just bring that notice to my city and say, hey, look, this is what we're looking at doing. This is going before the International Code Council in October. Can we put a pin in this and see how this goes? And they said, yeah, well, let's do that. Let's put a pin in it. And we ended up going, much thanks to the entire tiny house population, because that was 100% crowdsourced effort. That everybody was able to raise money to bring people in to speak on behalf of tiny houses in front of the International Code Council, and it passed. It was like a giant
Mm-hmm.
like climax in a B-roll movie when it happened, because it was so unexpected that we would turn opinions like that. But it went well, and so the city let us stay there. And then I came back to him and I was like, well, I'm really stoked that it passed, but also we're hitting the road in a little bit. Can we put a pin in it a little longer? And when we get back from the road trip, we'll work out the details. And they said yes. So they let me live completely legally from October until April the next year, which was a significant amount of time until we
Absolutely.
took off on our road trip. But kind of on that road trip, we realized that Boise wasn't really serving us anymore. It wasn't giving the same childhood to my kids that it gave to us. It's just a different city now. And we decided to look for somewhere else to live. And I feel like I betrayed the tiny house community for making that
Mm.
much progress with Boise, only to
Mm-hmm.
bail. But again, I had to choose me,
Oh,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I did.
But it
And
seems
we
like
ended up,
it seems like they're kind of right for the conversation. So I feel like you laid the foundation for someone who might want to be in that area to go in and have the additional conversation. So,
well,
I,
actually, and this is funny. So we moved, and then Boise reached out to me to help them legalize tiny houses. And so I've
oh
been having
wow,
discussions with the city of Boise for the last year and a half or so, as they go through the process of putting together a tiny house pilot program. Their
very
entire
cool.
intent is to have a different type of affordable housing. Their entire intent aligns with what I am. I mean, I've been telling them I think this is what matters, so hopefully that's impacted them. Um, but they're integrating it into the city, not just in tiny house communities. They're looking at tiny houses as an accessory dwelling to an existing house. That way, it can help offset people who don't have extra income because they have such a
Mhm.
big mortgage payment, or house
Mhm.
poor people can then get rental income for their existing assets, and tiny house people can move in and have options of where to do that at. But they've been developing a set of standards for a tiny house ADU pad, that I've been helping with, and they're supposed to be kicking that off, if they haven't already, very, very soon. Um, and then they're going to evaluate how it goes for 6 to 12 months, and hopefully it'll be very good, and they will be accepted in the city limits of Boise proper. But we'll see.
Very cool. So
All you can do is wait.
is that specific on tiny houses on foundation, or are they also
Nope.
considering on wheels?
Movable tiny houses.
Oh, beautiful. So
Yeah,
you
it's everything that I've been working on at the national level and what
mm-hmm.
we've been targeting with the IRC work. I have like Boise is incorporating all of that. I really feel like they're doing it the right way and that it's going to be successful and be able to be replicated. Because so far, most other places are doing it with loopholes like emergency housing standards or on
Right.
foundations or, as an RV. But Boise is developing code verbiage that is movable tiny houses on wheels as housing. So it should be good.
It sounds excellent, and I'm sure I will be reaching out to you because that's the same work that I want to do locally. So,
Yeah, it's
and I always say there's no use in reinventing the wheel if somebody's doing a good job of it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's so many good precedences out there right now. They just all have this little quirk, that just doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily apply everywhere. And I've really tried to get this to be something that applies anywhere, any city, because tiny houses need to be in urban areas. And
Right.
that's another reason I feel bad because we moved rural. Tiny houses are easy rural. And so I
Right.
can't be the one in the fight anymore because we're very happily, on our little
Right.
corner of paradise here.
But you're still in the
but
fight, and we'll talk about that because the rural, urban and rural conversation is important, and as we'll talk later in the conversation, really important from a safety perspective for
yes,
me and for Black people of
yes,
color. So we're going to talk about that, but. I would say you're still in the fight. You've done your
yep,
work here, but you still get to choose you,
yep,
and that's where I feel like these conversations, like I feel like you don't just leave it. You still do what you need to do for yourself, and then still try to help in other ways. And I feel like we're still doing that. So,
yes. I'm
and
trying.
so we'll talk about that, absolutely. So before we start, so the picture I'm sharing now is your site plan, and I want to talk about your new property. But I want to ask this question along this journey, what was there anything that you learned about yourself in this journey? The journey has taught you that maybe you didn't know from the beginning. So anything surprising?
Yes. No, nothing surprising, but something that was very hard to learn was that I have good intuition and I need to follow it more.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
every bad thing that's happened in my life is when I chose to do something because I thought it was the right move. Like, this is what we are told is the next right step. Every good thing that's happened is when I deviated from that because my intuition was different. And it's very hard to change my mind now, and that might be a bad thing, but I have learned that your intuition is your guide and you have to follow that. And without the tiny house, without the events that led up to that, I don't think I would have learned that lesson. And I'm really glad that I did so in my 20s instead of in my 50s, because there's a lot
oh
of people
yeah,
that
yeah,
learn it much too late. But if I could pass on to anybody, it's develop and trust your intuition. And experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. And so if if you make a mistake, you just keep going. You learn from it and you go. But we've
yeah,
got to make our own decisions. The paths we're on are not getting us the right places.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point. Another thing, like in conversation that you and I have had, you had so many challenges going on in the early on, and I'm sure you still have it, where your intellectual property has just been everywhere and taken and used in different ways that you never approved of. I know
Yeah.
there was some learnings there for you as well.
Yeah. In architecture, intellectual property is a big thing anyways, because people will hire an architect to build a building and then they'll just replicate that building. That's illegal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Intellectual property says that was designed for this one time. You
That
can't keep doing that.
absolutely.
And fortunately for me, that degree has provided me some education on intellectual property, because as soon as, probably, I'm guessing, that article you read in 2013 came out, my house appeared everywhere. And it was
Mm-hmm.
being used to sell mortgages, which was
Yeah.
too much for
Totally.
me.
Yeah.
I'm okay with people finding, I love when people find inspiration from it, when they say good things. I'm not okay when people use my image to prey on other people for something that's exactly opposite to what I'm doing. I'm
Exactly.
doing this as a self-sufficiency, an some path aside from a mortgage. We don't need the 30-year plan. And so when you take my idea and sell people a 30-year plan at
Right.
interest rates, I have big
Right.
problems with that. And so there was a couple years of this that has been battling a large behemoth of a company, which I'm not allowed to say, but if you know me much at all, you know who it is. Um, and Yeah, they said awful things, worse than any one person, because they have a legal department whose entire job was to discredit my
Exactly.
status as a human being and say
Yes.
that this isn't mine because I'm just a housewife that does this, that, and the other. And like, I honestly think if they weren't so darn offensive to me, I would have dropped that long ago, because I did not want to go the path we went. But when we were on our road trip, I was also in the heart of some pretty big legal battles with a corporation, um, that took a lot of my mental fortitude. That's another reason I kind of backed off of the tiny house community as a whole. It was getting aggressive, and I was in the middle of this really aggressive battle, and it was crushing my spirit, how much
Yeah. Yeah.
meanness there was throughout. And so I made an intentional choice to back off from that. And like, to this day, I'm pretty sparse online, but I am always available in emails, and I love getting back to people. Like, during that article where you probably saw my house the first time, for a number of weeks, I was getting an average of 1,300 emails a day. And I like to think
Wow.
that I responded to every one of them. It took me months, but it's important that when this idea of a tiny house resonates with you, you need to follow that.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be the ultimate choice for you, but if it's resonating on a level, explore that, because it's worth it. Whatever
Yeah.
mission you're trying to accomplish, whether it's financial freedom or just mental clarity, and getting away from all that noise, it's
Yeah.
worth following that. It You don't have to follow it to the end if it doesn't make sense, but search within yourself on what you are needing and find a way to make that happen. I'm obviously an advocate for tiny houses as a way to kind of clarify your life and
Absolutely.
relieve your mental stress and your financial stress. And so many burdens can be eased by responsible housing, but explore that for yourself, because if there's a reason you're going, you need to find out more about that
Absolutely.
for you.
I agree with
And I
that
think it's important that
100%.
people like Jewel and myself, we respond, and we have those discussions. And you can do so much good for somebody by answering candidly. And I won't lie to you. Some parts, I don't know, would be so much easier in a different house, but the juice is worth the squeeze for me. And that's why I
Mm-hmm.
continue every day to choose to live in a tiny house.
Yeah. Yeah. I always share it, like somebody who's going into it and it's just, really about the building. I feel like you're missing, because it's so much more than the building. It's that
Yeah.
journey. It's going to change you. It's going all of that.
And it's hard at
There's
first.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
like there's totally like a detox period where you're having to fall in love with a different way of living again. It seems so nice and pleasant in your head, and then it gets real,
Yeah.
and you gotta find a way to love that.
Yeah, I just
Which
shared that with some tiny house people who were new to the journey, and they had a post and they were complaining about all the things. And I was saying you are in that first
Hmm.
year, 2 year, especially having, like they were sharing, they had taken out a loan to buy the house and all of these things, and I was like, you've got to you're in a recoup period, but there is
Yeah.
a first year and a half, 2 years that it takes
Yeah.
you to get in the groove in this new lifestyle, and then it takes off. And anytime you kind of you relocate, and if you're having to do that
Yep.
infrastructure work again, you restart the clock, and
Yep.
you have to start that all over again. So I
Totally true.
absolutely agree with that. There was also a piece before we talk about this new space that I know you, and maybe it's not the time right now that you want to talk about it, but there was a note that you sent me about wanting to talk through toxic positivity. Do you want to talk about that now, or
I don't
we
know.
don't have to?
I just I don't know how to fold it in right now. I
Okay, no, just
no
then
no.
just
Let me try. So,
okay.
so we I bought this property, and there's like that readjustment period. I really like that you just said that because it makes it okay for me. The situations that we've been dealing with are in no way normal, but it
Mm-hmm.
has been a readjustment in some big massive ways, and I find myself making a lot of things okay that are not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's hard. It's hard to, and I wonder how much of my life I've done that. And if there was maybe that helped me live tiny for as long as I have, was I made it more positive than it was until it became that positive. And maybe there's a power in that that isn't just toxic, but Um, yeah, I no, I don't know how to fold it in right now,
Okay,
but I'm
let's
trying to get
just
to.
we can table it and come back to it. So
Yeah, let's talk about
I
heavy
want
stuff later.
yeah, okay. All right. So let's look at
Yeah.
the property. So this is and so over in the right hand corner, your house with the porch. So this was the love. I think this is probably the picture that was in the article I
Oh, that
saw.
picture of the tiny house.
Yes,
Yes, that's the
yes,
famous
and
one.
yes,
Yeah.
that is was my inspiration. So talk about your site plan, and then
So we found this property, and it's 7 acres. The estate ended up buying the lower portion there, so it's about 6 acres now. And it sparked so many ideas. There's a 1 acre pond on it. It's got a rocky hillside that's got granite slabs kind of exposed up top. In the middle is this whole field. When we came out and looked at it, it was a field of wishes. It was those big dandelion puffs, that they're like 5 inches around. But we came out and it was just like covered in them, and ladybugs were everywhere, and it was like this freaking idyllic. It triggered so many happy things for me. Um, and then we looked at it and we're like, oh no, that's not going to work. The neighbors there are sketch. Turns out the neighbors were abandoned houses that are being removed for a highway project. And so it did used to be a meth lab, but they no longer are there. And so we're like, oh, okay, then it's better. And then we ended up the same weekend getting a neighbor that's up the hill who uses that little drive right in between all of our stuff to get there. And it turns out they're super sketch too. So it's been a trip. But the property itself still triggers all of these happy things for me and James. And like we both like just sit there and we just get ideas from this place. Like it's got a little nest of trees and we're like, let's build a cool tree house in there. And it's like set up for us. Like it really feels like of this whole like area, they cut out the section that just resonates with us. And it kind of brings us to a different vibration just being here. And so there was no roads, there was no anything on this place when we bought it. We've cut in all the roads. I designed a barn, but our plan is to explore natural building methods and alternative housing methods. And we're just using the property as kind of a testing ground for that. First step was to bring up the tiny house. Second step was to design the barn. The barn is meant as kind of a community gathering space because we want to do we want to host workshops, mostly local, though I don't see any reason why we couldn't expand it. I want to do more homesteady type of stuff. I have no farm experience. Well, it's a lie. My grandfather was a farmer, but I have very limited farm experience. I have his, hand-me-down experience from when I was 10. But I'm learning how to garden. I'm learning how, animal husbandry. And I want to make a space where other people can learn those things because I think they're going to be important in our future, that we not lose those skills. And so the goal with this property was to make, I've had a hand in helping an online digital community grow around tiny houses. I want a real life community because I think there's a bit more accountability in that and a little less keyboard warriors. And I think building community is a really important aspect of our future as well. And so we're building this property as kind of a community incubator space for what James and I happen to love, which is natural building and repurposing. And so we're going to try to build some different structures that embody reclaimed housing ideas and natural building techniques. I want to do like straw bale building and cob building. We did a rammed earth wall, which may or may not be deemed a success. I'm not sure. Depends on when you ask me. But the whole idea is learning and not being afraid to fail and opening that up to other people who can then have the space and time to learn and create and bond and bridge some gaps that I think are important that we start bridging. And so this is it. This is where I live, and it's beautiful, and we love it, regardless of the strife that we've had being here. But that's one of the things about building community is figuring out how to work with the tricky parts too, and try to find a way through it.
And Macy shares the tricky parts on her blog, so all of that information will be in the.
There's some trigger warnings for you
in the video description. So if you want to catch up on the tricky parts, Macy, I think if I remember correctly, I also read that you weren't exactly sure about the property, like you all stumbled on the property and you and James kind of weren't sure, and then I think you went away and I think you kind of decided no, and then you went away but couldn't stop thinking about it.
It's funny because I found this property when we were down in the Florida Keys. We had no intent on moving to Moscow. Kind of on our trip, we identified that we wanted to go to a community that had a college. And I'm a UI grad. So we live now in Moscow, Idaho. I went to school in Moscow. So I was reaching back to my experience just to try to see what, university towns are. I was researching Moscow. And I found this property on Zillow, and like even on Zillow from the Florida Keys, I was like, that seems really cool. Like we should try to find something like this property. And it came online at the same time I found a pirate ship. And so there was this giant pond and a pirate ship. And like I had this idea that I'm going to put a pirate ship on that pond. I might still do that. I'm not sure. We'll see if a pirate ship shows up. But that pirate ship happened to be in Virginia at the time, so it was a no-go. But yeah, so we were driving through like 6 months later. We drove by and we're like, I wonder if that property's still for sale. And we drove out and looked at it, and both James and I were like, hell no, that is a dump. And like we didn't even get out of the car. We were just like, absolutely not going there. like it was not just a no, it was a and then we left, and it just still looked so good on paper. The reason we said hell no is there's an abandoned trailer park at the bottom. Like you enter through an abandoned trailer park. We didn't know it was abandoned. We just thought it was a dump.
Okay.
And the house that's right next to the property, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's been a meth lab. Like it has RVs out front and just mattresses everywhere. And wow. I mean, it's a tweaker pad. And so we're like, yeah, that's not our neighbors. We're not, that's not a safe place to raise our kids, But then we found out they're building a highway. And so the state had actually bought that property like 5 years prior. and it had been
Okay.
abandoned for that long, and people were using it as a tweaker pad. But this
Okay.
highway project, that's been another adjustment for us, is coming, and they cleared all of that up. So there's actually no neighbors except the one that bought the same weekend as us, who was located up the hill, who's no longer our neighbor. And if you want to know more about that, you can read on my blog.
Read the
It's
blog.
in uh,
Read the blog.
but um, but yeah, I mean, we've been here for 3 years, and there's been a few times over those 3 years where we're like, did we make the right choice? Um, and it has nothing to do with the property. We love it here. We really do. We're so invested in this. It's being touched by so many different situations that are hard to handle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and at a point, it feels like, well, if we make it through this one, what's the next one?
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
how many of these things can we endure? Because it's a lot. It's been a lot. But this is a picture of, we put a septic in. So I got the tiny house legalized. And their requirement was that we put a septic in, even though I had a composting toilet,
Yeah.
which they didn't
Yeah.
care if I kept, but I had to put a septic in. So they made us put this ridiculously large system in, but we were able to size it for our eventual house. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll be able to just plug and play into that eventually. But we bought a tractor. We learned how to drive a tractor on a hillside. So that was fun. And we dug it all out.
Very
Adventures. That's our pond looking back at the barn. The tiny house is just on the other side of the barn from
cool. Of the
there.
barn. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then our eventual house will be right underneath that cloud on the top of that little
On the
hill
top of
there.
the hill. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and it's actually like just halfway up the hill, but uh it's the top of our portion of the hill. Uh,
Okay. And you always have some of the most beautiful sunset pictures.
it's an easy sunset to
Oh,
love. Like,
absolutely. Oh,
I love
absolutely.
it. And we have so many patches so the ecosystem we live in is the Palouse Prairie ecosystem, which is deemed extinct, but this portion of it is one of the last remaining fragments. Less than 1% of the Palouse Prairie native habitat exists. And these are all native flowers, except a couple weeds, but it's a very beautiful property. We love everything that just springs up. We're surprised every year, every season. We're just like, oh, it's beautiful. What is it? And we're
Yeah.
learning. Everything's learning.
And that's such a cool opportunity for Hazel and Miles. Like I love
Mhm.
watching you turn it into the learning opportunity that it is
Yeah,
for them and the discovery just through the property.
yeah. We homeschool. So Hazel and Miles are 6 and 8 years old now, um, and we do homeschool out here, and we use the property quite a bit. Uh, for that, it's easier to do. That's a classroom space that we're building. That will be the kind of community center. We'll have area to host people. We're making it a little fun space. We're going to do some rainbow stairs and some optical illusions we're excited about in there.
Oh, very cool. And this is in the barn, correct?
That's in the barn. Yeah, that's the
And
top
okay.
mezzanine in the barn. The barn is 36 by 45, and we have a bay in it that's big enough to build a tiny house. It's got a big 14-foot door on it. That was like one of my
Oh, cool.
requirements. So we can let somebody build a tiny house in there, or we could
Very
build some of
nice.
these structures we're talking about in there. Everything is off grid. We're not connected to shore power, shore water. We collect our rainwater for our personal use, and solar and wind for power. Uh, so it's been fun.
And so this is
That
that's where the
is our
highway is
future
being
living
built.
room. Yeah, that's
Oh, where Denver is
exactly.
standing is the living
Yeah.
room, and
And
he's
Denver
looking at
goes
the
up there and
highway.
barks every sunset. He barks, and we live in this little valley, and so he'll bark, and then it will echo off the other side and bark back at him. And I swear he thinks he's barking at another dog. We call him Echo Dog. Like, Denver and Echo Dog
Hilarious.
are talking. It's ridiculous,
Hilarious.
but yeah, but it's
So
pretty.
very
We
cool.
love it. So yeah, you can see it's all ripped up right there. That's the highway. This is a fairly current picture that's underway, which construction's not fun, but there's a timeline to it, so we'll get through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So as we kind of move in the additional part of the conversation, so I always share that my experiences in the movement, um, my home, they created a shift in my journey. And I kind of my introduction when I say I offer up a lot of representation. That shift happened and kind of gave me like a responsibility for how I have to show up and hold space for people in the community. So my usual question that I ask around this point is whether what your home and your journey so far has created any change for you, like in your larger value system.
You know, I'm not quite sure how to answer that because I think I am in this kind of period of transition. Um, it has opened my eyes to a lot of things in the world. Um, I think when I lived in the city, it was easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle, and you curate your community and you hang around, the same group, and you live in a bit of an echo chamber. And I think I
Mm-hmm.
happily did that for a lot of years in my life. And kind of removing myself from the comfort zone, because even the tiny house was my comfort zone. It's different, but I was the same. And removing myself, moving, I think has done a lot for me. In I don't know, changing the way I experience reality. And it has a lot to do with city to rural. It has a lot to do with the situations I've been thrown into, that seem wild and crazy, but also it seems like the norm up here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very eye-opening to me. Um, and we've had discussions offline,
Mm-hmm.
racial tensions. Um, I see a lot more clearly than I ever have in my life, but I think it has more to do with removing me from that comfort zone that I'd always kind of circled in. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that tiny houses in general can do that for a person, but they're not the reason necessarily that it
Mm-hmm.
happens, but they can
Mm-hmm.
be a contributing factor. And so now I've been in. So I moved to Moscow just before George Floyd was murdered, and I got to see how a different town um, handles that. Like my bubble in Boise handled it one way,
Mm-hmm.
but moving here it was a stark realization for me. And I didn't know anyone, and I didn't have any comfort level here, so all I could see was the situation, and it was not acceptable to me. It was troubling to me. Uh, there's two blue counties in Idaho, Boise and Moscow. All the rest is dark red. Um,
Okay.
and it's not a political issue. I don't know, when that happens and you see more back the blue stickers,
Mm-hmm.
than
Mm-hmm.
anything, that's
Mm-hmm.
not the right response. Like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe time and place, but not now. And so it was troubling. And then this neighbor situation that you can read about unfolded in a really big way. The neighbor situation has to do with trauma. There was a registered sex offender who moved in up the hill and then
Mm-hmm.
moved his girlfriend and her daughter in, and then something occurred. And he is no longer with us. He chose suicide over prison. This is the guy who built our barn. So we had a close relationship with this, and we watched that spiral happen from a very close distance. We were threatened. We had our animals, our children, our lives threatened uh, persistently for months and months. And these people drove through our property to get to their house. And so, and I had several interactions with law enforcement through that situation where I was treated as the annoyance instead of the one
Mm-hmm.
who's having my life threatened. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I don't know. I have a very bleak outlook of the world right now, and I don't know how to fix that. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it's important to try, but I don't know. I feel like I'm in this really important time of transition, and that maybe
Yeah.
one day soon I will have like this light bulb scenario, but I feel
Yeah.
really broken. Um, and I don't know what to do about it. So
Hmm. I feel like I feel like you're verbalizing what a lot of people are feeling. Um, I I I think that's
I
kind
feel
of
like
like
it
a
too.
cloud.
Yeah. I mean, if they don't feel that way, I just don't think they're paying attention.
That's it, Macy. It's I was
And
just thinking of James. It's a James Baldwin quote that speaks to once you see it, you can't unsee it.
you can't go backwards. You can't
Yeah,
unsee it. And I don't know. I don't know what to do. Like,
yeah.
if anyone knows what to do, tell me.
Yeah, no, I think it's the moving through and it's the realization and it's the awareness because like you said, and that's a good segue for the next part of the conversation, having been in that insulated bubble and it not being your experience and then that bubble burst and now
Mhm.
you can't unsee it. And so that is an excellent segue because having been in the tiny house community from early on and being connected with you when I talk about how my responsibility and my role changed in showing up for my community. I share how building, like when I saw your house and I jumped into researching and all of the things and I built my house and I trotted out to the RV park as I was doing all of this stuff. Um, I recognized that I didn't see people who looked like me in the community, and there were a couple of conversations that happened in your tiny house group, but it didn't. It wasn't something that was holding me back from building, and it
Yeah.
wasn't until things started happening, and I started and various forms of racism I encountered in and from the beginning that then I realized, so I have to do something different. I have a different responsibility because I wasn't
Hmm.
factoring that in, but my experience was so different from my counterparts. And I don't know if you like if I think about early on, and you may remember some of these things like being kicked out of a tiny house group because I expected them not to use the N word when they referenced black people. I don't know if you remember
Woo.
that, and I
No.
got kicked out. I,
What group was
I got
that? Can we all avoid them? It was
yeah,
not
well, you
mine,
did.
right?
No, it was not your group, but you did. We had that conversation. I cannot think of the man's name who
I
ran the
do
group, but
remember it.
yeah,
I
I
do
got
remember
kicked
that.
out because I
I booted those
expected
people
that
from my
they
group.
yes, I expected that they would not use the N word, and I got kicked out. And then there are so many call outs that I put out to around inclusivity and diversity and representation in the at the workshops and the festivals, and then and that was kind of on deaf ears, and sometimes felt resistant, being that it was being resisted to the point of you also I'm sure remember that I got that anonymous threatening email that
Mhm.
folks were coming for me and the whatever it was that was supposed to happen to me because I was calling out these issues and I
Mhm.
was, as that email said, vilifying the people in the tiny house movement when I was really asking people to be accountable and responsible and
Mhm.
inclusive and diverse and to if you're selling plans and workshops to people of color and black people that you also need to be responsible to talk through and recognize the difference in the journey because my journey has been different from counterparts because if I talk about the time having to move my house from an RV park because I wasn't safe because I was black, or having to move from a rural farm where somebody and because I wasn't safe and then later on someone was actually arrested because of racial intimidation. So those are the things like we all know it's hard to find a place for a tiny house, and then as a black person it's even harder to find a place for a tiny house on wheels because you have to factor in safety. um
Are
and
you
it was
safe where
all
you are right now, Jules?
I am
I think
safe
you will.
because I am safe because I am on a friend's property, and it is his property. I am in a gated area, but then when I leave out of this area, I know my safety is in question. And so there are
Mm,
areas that I don't go in at night. Like
mm,
I go down the main highway at night. There are areas that I know not to be in
mm.
at night by myself. So it is it's still that challenge. And like you stated earlier, it's easier in rural areas for a tiny house on wheels. And so that is the why.
Not in that
But
way, though, maybe.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when I think about like joining the movement early on, like I was so excited because we were as I thought we were challenging the status quo of housing, um and there was an opportunity to right the ills of the current housing models, and they would and in writing those ills of the current housing model, then the right thing to do, the right thing to
Sarcastic.
do. He's gonna need some Tylenol from these calls. Um, but the right thing to do as we were pushing to change the status quo was to be sure that the people who were not being addressed and prospering in the current housing model, the conventional housing model, would be included in this push as we were
Hmm.
pushing for acceptance. And I was so disappointed when I realized no, these people just want to live in tiny houses, and they're not factoring in these other things. Um, and so we're not really trying to challenge the status quo of housing. It's just we want to live in a tiny house,
It's not
and
progress, it's just change.
it's just change, and it's not progress. So there was, and you just talked about it, there was a major shift and awareness that I know because you and I have had conversations early on. And while I would always say you supported me. You wanted to make sure I was okay. You'd reach out. You'd make sure, if somebody was giving me a hard time, they weren't in your group. Those were, and when I got that anonymous email, you absolutely reached out. But I also know that there was a shift for you, and you just started talking about it a minute ago with the murder of George Floyd. It was that bubble
Hmm.
being burst, and your awareness then, like it was a spotlight that happened, because it hadn't been your experience before, and it was, I think you were kind of insulated and not
Hmm.
aware of things. So you looked like you were getting ready to share
Mm.
something about that.
I, you know, I think what changed, I've always cared about you as a person, but your truth hasn't been my truth, and I
Hmm.
just I I can relate to it being female in a male dominant, and I could see those injustices that aren't spelled out, but I
Hmm.
never saw it in that way. Like I was concerned about you as a person through all of those events, and I thought those were horrible things. Um, but I was able to kind of keep them at arm's
Hmm.
length, because it
Hmm.
wasn't
Hmm.
happening to me. It was happening to my dear friend across the country.
Right,
And it
right.
it was easy to be like, it's not an Idaho issue. And I think what really turned for me was when George Floyd was murdered. And there's bigger reasons why it is actually a very big Idaho issue. And I feel embarrassed that I was able to do that for so long. Um, And I remember those discussions. I remember the email strings through with a lot of, I don't know, names in the tiny house community.
Hmm.
And it feel like we felt defensive, and I was absolutely a part of it because you've been very good at calling out, like, no, this is your responsibility. And
Hmm.
and I appreciate that about you. Thank you. Because it absolutely is my responsibility. But I've always been able to be like, well, I don't try to be a name, and I don't. I mean, I really don't. But you're very good at saying, but you are one. So now you have a
Right.
responsibility. And I never saw that. I never saw it that way. I've always just tried to be the best friend I could be for my friends, you know. And so when there's discrepancies between, I can think of one between Beth Ann and you, and some other people, I didn't know where to stand because you're all my friends, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
you've been very good at pointing out to me that you need to be on the side of what you feel justice is. And you've taken more time than you needed to explain some really important concepts to me that I'm sorry I needed explained too. But you're right. It's all of our jobs to see it. It's not about being defensive unless you're a part of the problem. And
Right.
it's not enough to just say, well, I'm not a part of the problem, so it is what it is, and this is just what these people have to deal with. Because that's not cool. That's not fair. And I think I've explained to you before, the only time I've made forward progress in my job is when I had a male colleague point out that I actually do know what I'm talking about and you should listen to her. Because people listen to that. And like
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about before, white people need to speak up and say this is an injustice and it needs to be righted. It's I don't know if you want to transition into our sticker initiative
Yeah.
here, but it's not
But
enough to just not
it's
be
not enough.
racist. You
Yeah.
have to
So
go
let's
more.
yes. So let's hold that. I got
Okay,
chills, Macy.
I'll let you do that one.
Yes, we're gonna go there in just a few minutes. You've made so many good points about the responsibility. And the I recall and me calling it out because whether people saw themselves as the leaders of the movement or not, they were. That is how
Yeah.
people were looking at them. And so with that, like you just said, there came a responsibility. Just like I have assumed a responsibility because I knew I was the most vocal Black person in the movement. I knew there was a responsibility to hold space to make sure the issues that I was experiencing were that I created awareness for other people to who wants to build $100,000 tiny house and you have nowhere to go with it as a Black person because you're going to run into these issues. So there was an awareness that needed to happen. And one of the things that during this time, because it was like fighting, it was and it was so frustrating to me because I knew it was the right thing. Like what I was saying, I knew was the right thing. And I can recall one of the counterparts, because the work that I do with Dominique Moody, I can recall one of the counterparts saying that they felt like I was, because Dominique is older, very mild mannered, and just, she gets a point across, but she's very mild mannered. And I remember there was a conversation and someone shared that they felt like I was abrasive and I used harsh words. And their analogy was that I was Malcolm X and they felt like Dominique was Martin Luther King, and that there was a way that they could relate to her better than me, or they couldn't even listen to me because I was abrasive. And it is all the things white privilege when you and
When you
and,
can
and
criticize how
fragility,
somebody's doing something.
when you can criticize the words that I use and my tone and all of this, but you can't see the experience
The
that I'm
message.
having where my life is in danger and I'm calling out these things that are important to the livelihood. Not this is I I too deserve to live in safety. Black people deserve to live safely in this movement, deserve to exist in this movement, deserve to see themselves in this movement. So it's all things white privilege
Hmm.
to say you need to use nice words as you
This
talk
is how you
about your
do it.
experiences with white supremacy. We want you to use nice words. Tell us about it, but be
Yeah.
kind. And so that part was, 7 years later, and it was just at that point, it was like, okay, I can't keep having these conversations. I don't need to keep having this fighting. I've got
Yeah.
work to do, and it's important work. And so for us, you and I, to have circled back and had these conversations, and your light bulb went off, for me it was like, oh my God, this is what I've been saying. And Macy is here now, and she's able to have these conversations. And so I so appreciate the because I know it's an uncomfortable space for you. I know that. And
It's
so I
important. It's I think we talked about it beforehand. I'm a listener right now. I am afraid of saying the wrong thing, uh,
yeah,
completely. But it's important that we have the discussions, and I do appreciate. I'm sorry I didn't always hear it the right way, but I do appreciate your words, abrasive or not. I don't think you ever come off as abrasive. You've come off very sure of yourself, and that's compelling. And you've always made me try to understand it even when I don't think my brain could have, I wanted to. Um, but no, I appreciate the space you hold in the world at large.
thank
I
you.
think it's very, very good. And you're a very, very good person to be able to handle it. I don't know how you do it because I've only been here a short while, and it's crushing. It's crushing.
It's soul crushing. It is
Yeah.
crushing, and it is crushing when you realize it is simply the color of my skin, something that I love, that is so beautiful, that is God given, that
Well, and
is,
that's what's so weird to me is like
yeah,
it just couldn't it didn't seem like it could be that simple, but I've seen it. I've absolutely seen it
yeah,
from people I didn't think were capable, but they're not trying. They're not
yeah,
when you tell somebody that's offensive, how they recoil to that or lean into it says a lot about them.
hmm,
And there's a lot of people that recoil and further victimize when you say that's not cool.
yeah,
And it's not a bad
yeah.
word to say that's not cool. Like,
No, it's not. It's not at all. Not at
but
all.
we have to start doing that. And I have become vocal where it's little things, to bring it back to tiny houses. The only way to get through the build, it all seems so big and daunting. And you just do one little thing every day. If you just
Absolutely.
see something, say something. Like
Yeah.
you don't let them go unpassed. And I think that can help. I don't know how to fix it, but I think that can help. And maybe eventually we'll build a different path. But you got to say something. You got to do
Yeah.
one little thing.
Yeah. So with that, um, I feel like this is a perfect place to segue into our project. And I want to kind of tee it up to talk about how we had this conversation and even started thinking through what this looked like. So um, around the George Floyd time, as things were happening, and there was an experience that I saw on Instagram that reminded me so much of my experience, and it was a Black RV family, and they were sharing how in the RV park that they were located, how, even walking out with their family, there were so many different types of flags flying, the Confederate flags, the and again, not political, this is life. Trump flags, the Confederate flags, where you as a Black person have to question your safety, and you have to question whether you're welcome. As a parent, you have to be concerned about your kids and their safety in an RV park, and how how difficult it is experiencing that. And so we were that was a conversation, and I had shared their journey. And someone pointed out that what would be nice for people in the community, tiny house community, or I think they were speaking then specifically about an RV park, was to have some type of a symbol that people who didn't feel that way could share, that would let Black people, people of color know, I think differently. I am a person that you can come to for safety, or if you need me to use my voice, or whatever it is that you might need, I am that person, and I want to be, I want to have that awareness. And so that is how, and so I tagged several, as this person said that, I felt like that was an excellent idea. And I tagged several white colleagues in the community to say, hey, I like this idea, but it's not my job to do this.
Mhm.
And you were the person that responded and you said, let's talk about it. I love this. Let's talk about it. And so that's kind of how we started this conversation. But I want to circle back to, before we even talk about what this is, this project, I want to circle back to what you just finished saying about it's not enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist, because that's a big difference. And
Mhm.
that I feel like, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just to tag team on that, like with my experience across the country camping, for over a year, I can count on one hand the amount of Black people I saw on the road. And that struck me in the middle of our road trip. I really expected it to be much different. And then I started doing some research on that. Like, why don't I see Black people at national parks? Like, to be curious enough to ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
And then, do you know how many interviews are out there of people that they just tell you, I don't feel safe? And
Mm-hmm.
that broke my heart, because that was such a powerful experience to me, to be out on the road in, I mean, you don't even have to like camping to visit a national park, but people don't feel safe visiting our national parks.
Mm-hmm.
That's awful. And something needs to change about that. But also, when that experience came up on your Instagram, I saw a lot of campgrounds that looked like that, to the point they made me uncomfortable. And
Mm.
it's the normal. And when people go camping, a lot of times it's weekend warriors who feel emboldened, and they're drinking and they're in this
Oh
area.
yeah.
And so
Oh
if they
yeah.
have any of those little inklings, it could escalate really fast. And
Mm-hmm.
it makes perfect sense why people of color and Black people don't feel comfortable camping. I
Mm-hmm.
barely felt comfortable in some of those instances, and I can sneak around under the wire. And
Yeah.
I saw that post, and I instantly, like, I felt so bad for that family, because it's not fair. It should not be that way. But I put myself in there, and like, what would I do in that situation? And there's nothing I know that I could have done. I don't want to like go up to somebody and be like, "Hey, I see you're Black. Let me know if you need anything." Like, it's uncomfortable for everyone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I thought, like, there needs to be a way for a person like me to be visually vocal just like that, but
Mm-hmm.
opposite. and
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's important. I think there is a lot of people out there who don't approve of that, and we don't know how to counter it without being equally obnoxious.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this whole as soon as I saw that comment, I wish I remembered who made that comment, because we should credit them somehow with us
I
saying
have their.
that.
I think I have their information on my page. So yes, I'll share that with you.
'Cause it
Yes.
was such a great idea. Uh, just if one person could feel more comfortable in their world, like, I don't know, I fundamentally believe, like, if people got out to explore and engulf themselves in nature, we would be better animals. Like, we're
Oh,
just so out
absolutely.
of touch with everything. And to know that there's whole races of people who just don't feel comfortable because it is what it is. Camping is what it is. That's awful, awful. And
Yeah.
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 Hmm.
Um. So, and someone commented that they um they're not going to live in fear, and I don't think anyone is suggesting that you live in fear. I've lived in my house for 7 years. I refuse to live in fear. I have to come up with another plan when I am faced with feeling unsafe. But I always say, do it. It's not for the faint of heart. You have to, but there has to
Yeah.
be an awareness. There are some dangers out there. I have to be aware of the dangers, and I also have to know that there are some people who I might be able to use as resources to assist me, because
Yeah.
there comes a time where you might need that. So it's not to suggest that you live in fear, but it is to suggest that you be aware and understand that there are people who don't feel that way as well.
I
Because
think,
when you're, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I think that don't live in fear thing is such an overused trope. Like, that's said by somebody who's never been afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And I I would get it until I moved my daughter in next to a pedophile who is
Mm-hmm.
active. Like, there are situations in which fear is a valid response. And
Absolutely.
the problem isn't that you're afraid. The problem is that I feel like that's just a form of victim blaming, the don't live in
Mm-hmm.
fear trope. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that
I don't think
for
there's
sure.
like, I'm trying to draw so many tangents here. Um, if somebody's afraid, that needs addressed, period. End of story. There's no arguing that. That's one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's a base level safety. That's legit. And you can't
Absolutely.
decide what's fearful for someone else or not. Like, this is the random tangent. We built a little free pantry one year for my son's birthday, and everybody's like, "Well, what if somebody comes and robs it?" The only answer I have ever had is they needed it. Like,
Yeah,
and that's not
absolutely.
mine to police. If somebody's feeling insecure enough that they need to, and we did have somebody week after week after week cleared out the pantry, and that's fine. I can keep refilling it.
Yeah.
And if
There was a
somebody's
need.
afraid, the only response is, how do we fix it? Not, well, you shouldn't do that. That doesn't help anybody. I don't
Yeah.
like when people say don't live in fear.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, 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 that was a good point to make. Um, so the project, the anti-racist, we're again, the note is it's not enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. Like, you can't just say I'm not a racist and then don't do any work. There
I'm not the
has to be
problem. Yeah.
yeah, there has to be some work that you're doing to be anti-racist, to be against racism. And so, as the follow up to those conversations that Macy and I had, and the call out that there should be some opportunity to, or some way that people who wanted to be those, I guess, beacons of safety almost, um, uh, that is how this project was born, and this is what we've called our anti-racist project. And the opportunity, Macy, I don't know if you want to talk through what it is or you want me to talk through what it is.
It is a sticker.
It
Um,
is a sticker.
that the idea is to just have a visual representation. It can fit on a drinking cup, it could fit on a bumper, it can fit somewhere. But just the idea, and my whole hope behind it, is that it can make one person feel a little more comfortable being in a space where they maybe wouldn't otherwise. Um, Jules, Jules. Why, I'm sorry, my sister-in-law is named Jules, and it's
You are
killing me.
fine.
I'm
You
so
are
sorry.
fine. You are no, you're
Jules.
fine. My family likes to call me Jules. Some of my family, I should say. So I'm not offended.
That's not nice. It's not your name. uh, Jewel and I, we went back and forth a lot on figuring out this design. It started in many different ways, but it's a simple identifier that you are someone who's doing the work, who sees the world as it is, and who is there to help if we can.
Yeah.
And my little introvert heart loves it because I don't want to be in somebody's grill. If there's a confrontation happening, I'll be there. But I don't know the nuance behind it, and so I don't want to interject myself. So it's just in this particular situation, I think this family, had they seen something like this on a vehicle, they would have felt a little more supported in the world. I'm
Absolutely.
sure that, like, I don't know, maybe they would have gone to them for help, or maybe it would have just been an internal feeling that happened. But the world
Yeah.
needs more of that networking and connecting. And a little less of the Confederate flags and the hate. And it's just a way to be visually vocal about things that matter.
Yeah. Visually vocal without actually even having to open your mouth. This represents what you want to say, and like you said, the work that you're doing. And so the cool thing about this is that what we after recouping the cost that Macy has put into developing this, we want the funds that are raised for this to go into supporting various initiatives. And so the first 2 or 3 months, the funds are we are planning to donate them to the Freedom Georgia initiative, which is, if you don't know about Freedom Georgia, you can actually Google them. It's a model for a Black community in Georgia, for environmental sustainability, safety, cooperative economics, all of the things, for um, for mostly safety in the for Black people, and to have community and not have to live in that fear. So, and again, we've already talked about the term living in fear, but not even having to have that conversation, because it becomes tiring for sure. So that is the initiative, and I am going to share all of the information on in the description, the video description. I Now that we are launching it, I do also have information on my website, Tiny House Trail, on one of my sites, Tiny House Trailblazers, and Macy. I will share the link to purchase the sticker in the description, and you can see the website here on the screen with the sticker. So we hope that you all will support, as well as we intend to kind of run a campaign so that we get information out about this, and have other people joining, to because this is the work that has to be done, and the support that has to be done, shared, and out there.
And just my kids and I are doing this, so we'll be sending it out from our tiny house. It's part of their homeschooling. I think it's important. I don't know how to do it, but I think it's important that I teach my kids how to be responsible for the community and their network, and to be aware of issues. And so they will be helping me address envelopes. I have it set up as it covers postage only, basically. Um, Anything else you donate, 100% of that goes to the I don't know, they're not charities, the programs, the various programs.
Yeah, initiatives.
Um,
Whatever. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Uh, Jewel and I have a little list of ones that we'll be going through, and they're all a little bit different, but they all support efforts and people in the BIPOC community, as a way. I think that's another hard truth that I've learned through my interactions with Jewel is this has to benefit people within that community. It can't be just a topical anti-racist thing
yeah,
driven and benefited by white people.
yeah.
So
That. Yeah,
all of the things that we're contributing the extra funds to go directly to these communities. Um, so, but
and I think
yeah,
that's a good point to call out, Macy, because right around the George Floyd time, there was a amplify Black voices thing that was supposed to be happening in the tiny house movement, but the amplify Black voices thing ended up being, we're going to amplify your voice, but we're also going to put you on our channel, because which is making us money. It's not helping you, it's not helping the BIPOC community. It is, again, doing the same thing, making money for
yeah,
me, and that's not cool, and that's not what all of that was supposed to be about. So I think that's an excellent point to call out, and I thank you for that. Thank you.
it's a little thing. But thanks for letting me
Absolutely.
be a part of it.
Absolutely. I appreciate you partnering with me on this. Um, what is so I always ask this question about what would be the title of your autobiography, Macy, if you were to write one? the
Enough
introvert
is
as well.
enough.
And you know it. Enough is
I
enough.
just thought of that last night. I didn't even know you were going to ask that question. But I was like, if I ever write a book, I'm going to call it Enough is Enough. It's a
I
good
like it.
book title.
It is an excellent book title. Excellent.
How about you? What's yours?
I think it's changing. I've got some hardship right now, and you know it. I just haven't shared it. So I think my title is changing.
That's fair. Mine
Yeah,
might too, but I feel
yeah,
strongly about it right now.
yeah. I like that. You almost got me, Macy.
I didn't do
Um,
it. I'm sorry.
no, I'm teasing. What's next for you? Future plans for your property, the code work you're doing. What cool stuff do you want to share that you're working on outside of our project? What other things do you
Yeah.
have that you want to
Um,
share?
I'm trying to do a lot for my local community. I have a friend who's a childhood advocate who helped me a lot through this situation, the neighbor situation you can read about. It's just too much to tell. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but she just got a new job, and she's working on with a tribe in a state nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she's doing a women's and children's shelter, and she'd like to do a tiny house model. Oh, cat, sorry. Uh, Jeez. Um, and I'm really excited about it because it's a way to help people, not by housing them, but by empowering them. And I think there's just so much potential. And she's the type of lady that if she can nail this, it can be replicated through tribal lands across the country. And I think it's such a great opportunity. I have so much hope for it, and I'm so excited about it. And teaching people skills to help themselves in a way that outlives them, maybe.
Yeah. That-
There's a lot of embodied power in a tiny house if you choose to tap
Mm-hmm.
into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always thrilled at the ways it shows up. And like this terrible thing happened with the neighbors, but it developed this friendship with this lady who is a type of person to change the world. And I'm really excited to where that goes. Um, and it makes me wonder about all these bad things that happen in the world. What is their point? Where are they going to go? And if we can tap into the power of that situation, we can change it. Um, it feels overwhelming because rules and laws and stuff set up systematically to benefit one type of person and not another type of person. I won't even
Yeah.
like bring race into it or anything like that, but it's there's a wall, and we can start to break it down, I think. And projects like that really I get really excited about. So I hope I can tell more about that before too long,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's
I
exciting.
look forward to that. That does sound very exciting. And the model that would be able to be rolled out because that's definitely needed. And so
You know,
that would be
tribal
fabulous.
lands is a really unique experience too, because building codes are different on tribal lands. Government
Mm-hmm.
agencies are
Mm-hmm.
different and interact different. And there's power in that because it might be easier in that situation to develop something that then we could see the benefit of easier and adopt more
Okay.
universally.
Okay.
And so it's almost like I mean, there's a lot of bad on why the rules are that way.
Right.
But it could be a loophole to find something very good too. And so we're trying to look at it that way. And even going into this project and developing it as if it was for the International Residential Code. It
Okay.
doesn't have to be to that level, but I want it to be so that if it can be replicated, it could happen on a larger scale.
Right.
But it's just interesting opportunities. But that one's got me pretty excited.
Yeah.
And then all the
Me
work
as
we're
well.
doing on the property right now, I want to, my kids are going to build a tree house. School year starts pretty quick, and we're developing our schedule for that. And that's super fun for me for now, as long as they let me homeschool them.
Yeah. Yeah. What's one
But
question, Macy, I didn't ask that you wish I had?
who's the cat?
And
That's
somebody
Oreo.
asked, can we see the cat again
This is a
before
little
you go?
Oreo. He's got a little bobtail. He's my son's cat. I got my kid. Well, Ginger is our other cat who belongs to my daughter. It's their first dose of responsibility. They get a cat at 6 years old, and then they will get a dog at 12 years old, and they will be responsible for them. So the day before yesterday, we got this cat who's a little Manx kitty. And he's a handful. You've seen him crawling all over everything in the background, falling off the ledge. But yeah, that's a cat.
He has provided entertainment. What's his name?
Oreo. I call him Cookie
Oreo.
though, because
Oh,
Oreo is a boring name.
Oreo.
Uh,
Uh,
just like every other black and white. Ouch, cat. He's sorry.
uh-oh. Uh-oh. Share with us, and I'll share the information in the description. Share where people can find you and support the stuff that you're doing.
Um, well, I don't need any support other than if you want some stickers and share them widely. If you want to contact me, my email is the best place to do it. And I do always get back to people. It's mizacy@gmail.com. I am interested in one-on-one discussions. I get tainted with group discussions pretty easily, and I bow out. But you can find me on Instagram at What If Workshop Idaho. That's where we document our whole off-grid lifestyle process and projects of where we're going in the world. And I try to share all the pitfalls and successes that we have along the way as I learn things. And my website is minimotives.com, minimotives.com. That's where you can read about the neighbor situation.
Yeah, and I'll
And
share all of the
other
links.
things. I
Yeah,
document the whole camper build there. I document the whole tiny house build, obviously, there, as well as just life in general. So should be hopefully easy enough to navigate. But that's all. I don't ask much in return for anything. I'm always happy to help people along their path. If it's helpful, please reach out. If not, leave me alone.
so someone asked, so apparently I still had a small and was showing the anti-racist sticker, so they want to see Oreo again, please.
Oh,
in, in the
Oreo
bigger
cookie.
screen.
Oosh. Oh, little
There's
Oreo.
Oreo. He's cute. Oreo is
And
like
his
as
little
if
nubby
something.
tail. That's my favorite.
He does have a bobcat tail. That is so cute.
Yeah, he's got pointy ears and a bobtail. He's funny.
That is so cute.
I
Well,
know it's all
Macy,
about the cat. The dog's more famous than the tiny house
yeah,
too. But
Denver is so unbothered about his fame. So he's
he's
like,
only
whatever.
bothered if he doesn't garner attention from people. Like we take him on walks and he's like, "Why don't they want to pet me?" But yeah,
Macy, I thank you. I think this conversation has been in the works for a while. Life has been
yeah,
happening. Um, but
to both of
I
us.
think, yeah, I think you shared, and I think in one of the emails you shared the timing when it's supposed to happen, it will happen. And I knew that to be true, and I also knew that it would be a really good conversation, and it has been. I'm always um, I'm always excited to have these conversations on Sunday because they end up being soul work, soul conversations. And I definitely needed a soul conversation today. And so I thank you. Um,
Thank you.
and I look forward to the kickoff of our project and how that works and grows. And I'm excited to know that Hazel and Miles this will be part of their learning and they'll be involved in this because you're right. It has to start with the kids to
Hmm.
the conversations, the awareness, but it also has to start with kids and changing the mind or making sure that they understand and don't just operate in that bubble and don't have an awareness of the
Hmm.
responsibility that they all have. And so that's important. And I'm happy to hear that you are aware of that and doing that work, and others should be as well.
Try it.
Absolutely. So I am going to close out our session. I thank everyone for joining. Macy, don't hang up, because once I close us out, you and I can still chat. So I thank everyone for joining. I am going to, if I figure out how to share, to change the screen here. This
Thank you
again has,
all for hearing me.
oh no, thank you so much. There was a question before I close out, that there was a question, and I don't know if you know the answer to that, but the question is, with more tribal land being given back to Native Americans, would they be open to the possibility of welcoming more people of color on their land, as in tiny houses? I'm thinking that's probably to be seen.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
learning though, and that's an
yeah,
interesting question.
yeah. It's a very interesting question, and I like my high level thought would be to say no. I feel like they've been relegated to these small spaces overall anyway. I would hate to take space from them, if there hasn't been enough taken from them. I feel like,
Hmm.
even as a Black woman, a person of color, I feel like there are other communities that we can create that doesn't take from them more than what has already been taken, is would be my initial thought. So
You,
um,
I think I probably have the same initial thought, but it's also pretty incredible the mentalities of indigenous tribes. They
oh,
still hold near and
absolutely.
dear. We are one, and regardless of the hate I see strewn about, like I'm on indigenous Nez Perce land, and the Nez Perce Indian Reservation is about 30 minutes south of us. And they are the most involved group of people, and they're kind, regardless of, there's just some of the most horrible things I didn't know still happened, just get thrown around online like it's a Tuesday, you know?
Hmm.
Um, but still, the Nez Perce people have such an incredible idea of humanity that I hope catches on, and I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if it was, yes,
Oh yeah,
the
I'm
whole
sure
way
they
through.
would. They would open. I'm thinking that they would. We have so much that we can learn from them.
Mhm,
Climate change, like, it's almost like if you let them run the world, and so many of the ills that we're
mhm,
experiencing could be addressed. And so I agree with you in that line of thinking as well. Yeah,
yeah, good
absolutely. Well,
question.
Macy, uh, I thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you
And
for letting me
uh,
share your space.
what'd you say?
Thanks for letting me share your space.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I appreciate you joining me in my space. So again, this has been one of the conversations on intimate spaces, and this is the work that I do here, alternating between these conversations with lovely guests, and then the "What's Your Question?", where I try to answer some of the frequently asked questions, and to provide a space where people can gather to get questions answered. And so that's what I do on alternating Sundays. So I hope that you will join for one of the segments. Like and share this video if you found it helpful. Subscribe to the channel so that and turn on notifications so that you'll know when content is available. And I thank you so much for joining, and I wish everyone a happy Sunday, and take care. Thank you all.
Thanks.